into free choice, understanding free choice. But again, the only way of understanding free choice is the exact opposite way that we are conditioned to. So actually, in the end of this Maamer has a really good way of explaining the exact opposite way of what free choice is, and it's a very different than what people think. It'll take a long time to get there, but yes, if you understand free choice the way humans are conditioned to, you won't understand it at all. Okay, so this Maamer was said in 1953, and as we said many times, you could read in the foreword. Stalin died that night. A lot of people. Now the Rebbe was, of course, a major miracle worker, and there are many, many miracles that people saw through the Rebbe, both on a global scale and the individual scale. However, the Rebbe was very humble and modest about it. When people will come and say, "Oh, wow, thank you for this blessing or this miracle," the Rebbe would often say, "Oh, it was my father-in-law. I don't do anything. I just, give it over to my father-in-law who was already deceased." Likewise, the Rebbe would often say, "Okay, no, it was God did it. Thank God, God did it." The Rebbe recognized that he was just the conduit for it. However, this Maamer here, interestingly enough, the Rebbe basically, when they edited the Maamer, and the Maamer was ready to be given out, and they edited the Maamer to be given out. So the way it would work is the Rebbe would say a Maamer, and then they would work it through, and then they would give it out. They would give it to the Rebbe, and the Rebbe would give it out. And they were edited by Maamer. And this was in 1991. They wrote about it, this Maamer, which seems to be connected with the death of basically the famous villain, and that was Stalin. And now, typically, when they would do that, the Rebbe would just take those things out, because the Rebbe, again, would oftentimes not recognize the miracle working behind him. However, in this Maamer here, the Rebbe let it in, and as part of the editation, in other words, the Rebbe recognized that this Maamer had to do with the Farbrengen, which had to do with Stalin's death. So at that time, Chassidim definitely felt that Farbrengen there, the Rebbe had performed spiritual service, which caused Stalin's death. But in 1991, the Rebbe recognized it. In other words, until then, it was like rumors amongst Chassidim. But in 1991, the Rebbe actually recognized it. But anyways, that's not so connected to the Maamer. Although the Maamer does talk about a villain, Haman, and talks about the purpose of villains in the world. And it's actually a very, very interesting Maamer. It talks about the purpose of villains. Okay, so we'll start. Kein Purim Maamer. So in the end of the Megillah, in the 9th chapter, there are 10 chapters in the Megillah, verse 26, it says, "Therefore this holiday will be called Purim." So this is already in the victory part of the Maamer. "Therefore this holiday will be called Purim al Shem HaPur." It is called Purim in commemoration to the Pur. Pur means a lottery. So what happened at the end? What was the lottery? We know that Haman made a lottery in order to decide when to destroy the Jewish people. Now, we've mentioned this a few times this year already. When you're making a lottery, whoever wins the lottery is decided by God. Right? It's decided by God. So Haman was a sorcerer, and he wanted to know, would he even have a chance of destroying the Jewish people? And what he determined was he'll make a lottery, and the lottery will decide what month and date to do the destruction of the Jewish people, the genocide. And based on when it fell out, that would be God communicating to him through the lottery that I agree with you or I don't agree with you. So Haman did the lottery, and the lottery ended up in the month of Adar, and he said, okay, that's good communication, because Adar is, of course, a very sad month, and it's the month that Moses died. So Haman understood that if the Jewish people are sinning, they'll be deserving of genocide. So Haman said, look at the genocide, and look at the symbol from God, that on Purim, that on the month of Adar, right, the Jewish people were destroyed. That means that their sinning is enough for God to destroy them, because God is choosing a sad month. And therefore the Megillah says that's why the holiday is called Purim, because of that Purim, right, because of that lottery. So this is something that the Rebbe spoke about extremely commonly, based on the Tanya. The Tanya, when it talks about the sustaining utterances, it says the words of God are what gives life to everything. And therefore, the name of something in Hebrew shows and refers to the nature of the idea. The reason why Purim is called, named, the holiday of Purim is named after the lottery, the Purim because it's a fundamental dimension of the holiday is the lottery. Pur ahu hagayral. And furthermore, so the Megillah says it's called Purim. Pur hu hagayral. The Pur is the lottery. The Pur is actually a Persian word, and the Gayral is the Hebrew word. We need to understand. Explanation is required, as emphasized. The Alter Rebbe is emphasized in his Purim Maamer. On surface, this is not a fundamental idea of Purim. This is not the main miracle, right? This is just how Haman decided when to destroy the Jewish people. But this is not the fundamental miracle of Purim or the salvation. Furthermore, it's part of the story of Purim that is called Pur, is not only not the miracle of Purim, but on the contrary, this is part of his decree, right? The decree, the lottery didn't help save the Jewish people. It actually was a step in destroying the Jewish people. It gave Haman confidence in destroying the Jewish people. To quote the Megillah, he cast a pur, a lot to annihilate and destroy them. From the fact that these days are called Purim, we're calling the lot Purim. However, from the fact that we're naming Purim, this great holiday, in the Megillah, is named after the lot, the implication is that this is a fundamental part of Purim.
So the lottery set things in motion.
Well, it's one of the details that set things in motion, right? But even still, why are we focusing on this detail? And this is on the opposite side of the story of Purim. In the story of Purim, Haman wanted to destroy the Jewish people. The Jewish people were maybe worthy of destruction. And then he made a raffle, decide when to do it. And then we have all the details of Purim and the salvation of Purim, right? So obviously this lottery is a fundamental idea, and we're even naming the miracle after the lottery. So again, in this story of Purim, well, we'll go more, but in the story of Purim, seemingly, it's just a side event, right? It's a side event. It's one of the details in the destruction of the Jewish people. Furthermore, not only are we're naming this. Not only that, but it seems like it's not a main part of the story. If you would tell someone the story of Purim, you can totally ignore. In fact, we usually do. When we summarize the story of Purim, we usually ignore the raffle, right? We say, this is the way we say it. We say, Haman destroyed the Jewish people, Esther, the story of Esther, etc., etc. The Jewish people were saved, and we created the holiday of Purim because there was a lottery. In other words, we even say it after the fact, because we need to answer why it's called Purim. So that itself shows that Purim, the fact that we say the story over that way, that itself shows that it seems like it's not such a fundamental idea. But the fact that it's the name, obviously it is a fundamental idea. So in this Maamer, we will explain how it is indeed a fundamental idea. Now, seemingly, we can answer based on what the Gemara says. Haman wanted to destroy the Jewish people. He was already trying to do it for a long time. And when his lottery fell out in the month of Adar, he was very joyous. The lot fell, and a holiday that Moses died. This is a positive omen which is not a positive omen for the Jewish people. He didn't know. He didn't know that on the 7th of Adar Moses died, and the 7th of Adar he was born. According to this, it's possible to say, why are we calling the holiday Purim? Because the lottery ended up in this month of Adar. It was actually happy. The event is the sun. Okay, so what happened? He made the raffle to end up in Adar. Adar, he said, is a sad month. This is a bad omen for the Jewish people, a good omen for my destruction of the Jewish people. He didn't know that really Adar is a good month. In other words, really it's a good month for the Jewish people because it's the month that Moses is born. Aval, Beir, Zedayin, Sarchian. Even if we give that as the explanation, this is still needs clarification. So let's say Haman would have done it in another month. Maybe it would have been a worse outcome for us. The fact that God made it happen, the month of Adar was the month that is really a good month. It's the month that Moses was born. That shows that that's what brought the salvation. This explanation, nevertheless, requires further clarification. For calling the holiday Purim based on the lottery indicates the implication is not only when the lottery fell out, but actually the holiday is related to the idea of lottery. On the contrary, what is the greatness of Purim? The lottery itself. Right? So we wanted to answer, well, maybe, look what happened. The fact that Adar was chosen as a lot was a bad omen for the Jewish people. And the Gemara says, actually, it was a good omen for the Jewish people. So now, if Haman did it in the month of Adar, because of this raffle, that's actually a good omen. Maybe that's what saved us. However, that explains the date of the month that the lottery fell out. But how is the miracle of Purim related to the lottery itself, the idea of a lottery? The goyel hu inyan, okay, va'adrava ikar hanes hayim mitzad hu hagoyel. On the contrary, the fundamental mental dimension of the holiday must be because of the lot. So the goyel hu inyan alav. For in fact, the lottery reflects a very lofty spiritual rung. Shemizendim shechanes, and that's where the miracle came from. So we must say, the lottery is a very lofty thing. Lottery is a very lofty thing. Now, actually, in Jewish law, we do find that lotteries are very lofty things. I remember one of the secretaries, there was a convention of women. It's actually very interesting. There's a convention of women. There's a group of women. The women campaigns of the Rebbe are basically dedicated what they call them the Neshei Chabad. Neshei Chabad are the women of Chabad. They did all sorts of different campaigns for the Rebbe, and still do it till today. They actually have a convention every year. So actually last night, one of the videos we watched was about the convention in Detroit. I think it was in 1991. And what happened was they all got stuck. There was a huge snowstorm. And they were all very upset that they're stuck in Detroit for an extra weekend. And the Rebbe gave a very sharp answer to them. He said, no, this is for the good. You have to use it out for the good and use it opportunity. But another lesson about the women's convention is one of the Rebbe's secretariat they had a raffle who's going to go to the convention, and she was one of the winners of the raffle. And she said, I just had a baby, I can't really go. It's very difficult to go. And the Rebbe told the secretary, he said, no, he said a raffle is a very spiritual, holy thing. If you have a lottery, God chose the winner of the lottery, right? There's no such thing as things by chance. God chose the winner of the lottery. And therefore God wants you to go, and therefore you should go. And she went nonetheless, even with the hardship, because she won the lottery. So now what we're saying the fact that Purim is called Purim is because it is related to the idea of a lottery. And a lottery is a high thing, a holy thing. It's God mixes into lotteries. And there's actually brought in Jewish law how you can't go against the lottery because it's decided by God. There's the opinions who say that. Let's say, people are deciding responsibility of somebody and they make a lottery who's responsible. Well, that's who God wants. It couldn't be more clear than that, right? So now we'd be like, oh, it's just by chance. There was a 50% chance. But really, it's not a 50% chance, right? God chose that. So actually, we're saying that Purim is related to that idea of a lottery, as we'll explain. And it can't just be related to the fact the lottery ended up in Adar, which was Haman thought was a good omen for him, and really was a bad omen, good omen for the Jews, because it wouldn't be called Purim. Purim means the lottery, so it's related to the idea of lottery. All right, so chapter 2. We'll understand this based on the explanation in Torah Or. Torah Or is from the Alter Rebbe, and the ideas of Purim are so deep and they're so powerful. The Purim, Yom Kippurim, Sheyachim Zalazah. Purim and Yom Kippur share a connection to each other. Now, the origin of this is from the Zohar. The Zohar says Purim and Yom Kippurim are related. Yom Kippurim literally means the day which is like Purim. Right? That's what Yom Kippurim means. Now, Yom Kippurim is in this week's Parsha, right? It's the story of the golden calf and God forgiving the Jewish people. And Purim is much after, long after. Nonetheless, the Zohar, obviously God's above time, and the Torah is above time, even the rabbinic traditions are above time. And the Zohar says that Purim, Yom Kippur is like Purim. The Purim, Yom Kippurim, Shayachim Zalazah. Purim and Yom Kippurim are interrelated. The Perish Yom Kippurim Hu Kamai Purim. Literally, if you translate it, the day of Yom Kippurim means the day which is like Purim. When we say moreover, the description of Yom Kippur as a day like Purim, only like Purim, indicates that in fact Purim is loftier than Yom Kippur. All right? So the fact we're saying this is the day which is like Purim means Purim's the main thing, and Yom Kippur is compared to it. Among the common factors shared by Yom Kippur and Purim is both of them have the lottery. They both feature a lottery. So one of the most important mitzvahs of Yom Kippur, one of the most unique services of the Kein was the Yom Kippurim and Pilu Gadol Shnei Asirim. On Yom Kippur, the lots were cast to determine which two goats would be sacrificed to God and which would be sent to Azazel. So we read in the service of Yom Kippur, one of the services was they make a lot on two goats, which one of them would be chosen to be sacrificed and which one would be chosen as Azazel. We got the right one and the left one. Azazel was thrown off a cliff until it died. Very, very spiritual service. Not getting into the explanations now, but there are fascinating explanations. Some of the explanations I like is Rabbi Jonathan Sachs' explanation. But it's really a mitzvah that we don't need to understand. But that's what we did. And part of the mitzvah was, you can't just say, here's one goat and here's another goat. We make a raffle, which goat it's going to be. And one goat is chosen for sacrifice, and one goat is chosen for Azazel. Yeah. Let's just finish the period. V'gam Purim, hu al shem Purim, hu al Gadol. Furthermore, Purim is named after a raffle, right? A lottery.
But the common understanding of a lottery is that the outcome is random. It's chance.
Yeah, yes, right.
But you just stated that the outcome is chosen by God.
Correct.
So it's really not
so let's put it another way.
There's a contradiction.
Coincidence or chance means without us affecting or putting in control, and without being in control of a human being. If human being affect the terms of the lottery, then it's not a fair lottery.
Understood.
But chance is God, right? Meaning beyond our control is God. There's no such thing as chance, which is not God. So yeah, that's correct. The common understanding for us, it's a coincidence, it's chance. But the Jewish understanding, obviously, is God runs the world. So now, why is it that rabbis say raffles kind of have to follow it? Why did the Rebbe tell that lady that she has to do it? Because if we mixed in our intellect and our emotions in a decision, it's semi-up to us. So we are part of the decision, right? And based on different things, ultimately it's up to God because He gave us those attributes, but we feel we're part of the decision. And sometimes God says in Jewish law, He says, use your judgment. I want you to use your judgment in this case, right? But when we do a raffle, we are mixing out our judgment from it. And that is the term. So who is it totally on? It's totally on God. So now, let's say you buy a lot of raffle tickets. So now the statistics are higher that you're going to win, right? When you have that winning ticket, it's also determined by God. Really, you could have just had that one ticket, if you think about it retroactively, right? You could have just had that one ticket. Just you tried to mix in as much as possible. But ultimately, it's not up to us. Ultimately, it's not up to us. God may make it seem like it's up to us. He might say, hey, you bought 50% of the tickets, so you for sure will win. But ultimately, it's up to God.
But then isn't the question, why does God choose to act indirectly? In other words, God could tell us what to do directly.
Correct.
Say, as God did when he spoke to Moses.
Correct.
Moses didn't cast a lottery.
Well, so Moses actually cast a lottery, very interesting lottery, when they're deciding which land to go. We find several lotteries in the Torah. But Moses cast a lottery, he's instructed to cast a lottery when which land goes to which tribe in Israel. And interestingly enough, the lottery calls out who's going to win. Also, the Urim, the Tumim, the Choshen, the breastplate of the Kohen Gadol also said who's going to get what. And actually, Rashi says there, he says, Moses is showing them that when God calls out what it's going to be, the lottery follows that. In other words, he's teaching the Jewish people that when you make a lottery, it's really up to God. It's really up to God.
But God is deciding when to act directly.
That is correct. That is
or
correct.
through a lottery.
Correct.
So the question is why?
So now the truth is everything that happens in your life is also from God. Nothing is not from God, right? Everything is from God. So ultimately, everything is from God. So yes, there are times when God communicates, and there are times when God wants us to have a choice and see, hey, it wasn't supernatural, it was just chance, right?
So is there a significance in when God chooses to act directly and when God chooses to act indirectly?
Yes, it's almost like nature versus miracles,
So,
supernatural versus natural.
I'm not, we accept the idea or the belief that the outcome of the lottery is chosen by God.
Yeah.
And
the reality is every outcome is chosen by God, right? Every outcome of
so
everything.
I have a lottery at all.
So here the Torah says have a lottery, right? These examples the Torah says have a lottery. Haman understood that a lottery is chosen by God. Jewish people, when there's a lottery, we should believe it's chosen by God, right?
But Haman could not have believed that the lottery was chosen, the outcome of the lottery was chosen by the Jewish God.
Well, he believed that it was. Actually, in the Midrash, he believed it was chosen by the Jewish God. As I said in the beginning, in the Midrash, actually, there's different Midrashim, but it says that what was the lottery? Haman had decided, he'd set up this whole thing with Achashverosh that Jewish people should be worthy of destruction. We should deserve to be destroyed by God. But in his mind, he said, well, God might still have mercy on them. So he made a lottery, and based on the lottery, he was like a wizard. He was a sorcerer. Based on the lottery, he was going to see if God would give him permission to destroy the Jewish people. So when it ended up on the sad month, he said, okay, God is communicating to me that I have opportunity to destroy the Jewish people.
He just misinterpreted the meaning of the outcome.
Yes, correct. So the outcome was decided by God. He admitted that. Now, really, everything is decided by God. Now, God sometimes sticks his hand in and we can see it, and sometimes God is hidden. And there's different reasons why God hides himself. We'll talk about it in this Maamer a little bit. Sometimes when God is hidden, it causes us to act more. It causes us to want to return to him more. Okay. So Purim, so the Alter Rebbe says that Purim and Yom Kippurim both have the idea of a lottery.
Right.
V'oid inyan b'shaychus to Purim v'Yom Kippurim. What is another common factor shared by them? So number one, the names are similar. Number two, they both have a lottery. Another thing which is related, Purim and Yom Kippurim, sheshneim heim l'mayla m'shem havaya. They both are higher than God's name. They're higher than God. The Torah says, so the Torah said, Yom Kippurim k'sev l'fnei havaya titaru. With regard, now, what it literally means is, with regard to Yom Kippurim, it says, You shall purify yourselves before God. That's what it says with regard to, Yom Kippur. That's what regard it says Yom Kippurim. Now, the Kabbalists, they always note that when it says Havaya is a name of God. It's a transcendent name, but it's an expression. When it says Lifnei Havaya, it means before God, facing God. But it also means higher than God's name. You are reaching higher, you're transcending God's name. Typically, different rules and different come from God's expressions because a name is definitive. So now it's saying higher than God's name, right? So Yom Kippur, you reach higher than God's name. And that's actually related to Yom Kippur. The Yom Kippur is a day of forgiveness. We spoke about this several times. The reason why it's day of forgiveness is because it's higher than God's name. It's higher than rules. It's higher than any type of
But how can
defined
there
expression.
be something higher than God's name?
So God's name is a name. It's an expression, right? So we spoke about this on the Friday class. When there's a name, there has a definitive property. Even if the name represents God's infinite, there's a definitive property in God's infinite. There's a definitive property. You're saying this is an expression from God. If it's not definable, we can't give it a name, right? So ultimately, God's essence we can't name because it's not definable.
Right.
So we call it essence, but even that is just as much the best our brains can do.
Right.
So here basically it says Yom Kippur. Now we said Yom Kippur is related to God's forgiveness. When we're talking about Torah, not necessarily their forgiveness. The rules are rules, right? Rules are rules. However, when we're relating to God deeper than His rules, Lifnei Havaya Titara, the purification comes higher than God's name. So that's what's it related to Purim.
So is there a name for God above Havaya? How
It's
could there be something, I still don't,
not well. So Havaya is one of the highest names. There's many names of gods, and there's many intentions, and there's many ways of writing Havaya and everything like that. But yes, we're saying higher than God's name, His transcendent name, higher than God's name. So what that means with regard to Yom Kippur is, as we spoke about, we said there's God's will, His God's expression, right? And this has to do, remember we said Moses' name is erased, because when you're talking about Moses' name and God's name and the Torah, then there are rules, and you break the rules. Just like if you jump off a cliff, you'll most likely die, right? If you jump off a very high cliff. That's the rule, right? That's the rules. There's rules in the Torah. And then Yom Kippur is a day which is higher than rules. It's a day where God forgives and transcends, overlooks the Torah, because it's higher than God's expression. So Havaya is a name of God. Higher than Havaya is higher than His expression, right? So what's higher than His expression on Yom Kippur? We have a deeper connection than the way God plays out as our God in this world. We are rooted in God's essence. So that's the idea on Yom Kippur. Yom Kippur being purification coming from before God, from above God. Yeah, you got that?
are these expressions labels created by us or labels created by God?
By God.
So Havaya is an expression created by God.
Yeah,
So there's something higher than that.
correct.
So what could that possibly be?
The state of God before the expression.
When you say before, what is we don't mean it in terms of time, right? We don't mean earlier. What do we mean?
Well, let's look at it in terms of time. So, God expresses Himself. Who does He express Himself to? Who does He express Himself to? To creations, right? Expression has to be to somebody. If it's not to somebody, then what exactly who are you expressing it to, right? So now let's say, we have this term in Judaism, Ein Melech B'lo Am. There's no king without a nation, right? So God had to create a nation to be a king, right? In order to be a king, He creates a nation. So now when we talk about Havaya, this is an expression of God to somebody.
God knows God can create.
Correct. So now,
God doesn't need to create to know that it's capable of creating.
Correct, but he does. He does create and he expresses. So how does God express himself to us? All right, so we spoke about this on Friday. When we think of God, what do we think about? We think about the Torah, we think about mitzvahs, right? We're thinking about physical things. When we were at the splitting of the sea, right? We were at the splitting of the sea. Did we see God? Did we see God? No, we saw water. We saw water standing, right? We didn't see God, right? When we were at the giving of the Torah, did we see God? No, we saw all these sounds and lightning and thunder and the Torah being given, etc., etc. We saw something. Those are all expressions. That's God's communication. Now, in communication has to have some property of definition. If the communication doesn't have any properties to it, any defined properties, then you haven't communicated anything. You've communicated nothing, right? So, same thing with God.
This presupposes that God has a need to display his ability to create.
Well, you don't have to get into a need, but this is what God chose to do. We don't have to talk about need right now, why God wanted to do it, but this is what God chose to do. In actuality, he chose to create a world. He chose to create humans, create the Torah, create the Jewish people. He created all these things. Why he created it, and did he need it, did he want it? That's another discussion. God created it, right? And he revealed himself, right? So now, let's say you're at the splitting of the sea, right? And you're a very literal person. So what do you see there? You see water. That's all you see, water standing, right? However, the human mind says, no, this is God, because usually water flows, and now water's not flowing, right? And all the different details of it, all the different miracles, the ground is dry, the Egyptians are killed, right? These are seeing God expressing himself in a transcendent way. When you see water flow, do you see God? If I look here, do I see God? Yes, it's also God. Everything is God. All matter is God, right? But I'm seeing God express himself in a range that he calls nature.
I understand. Water is acting against its own nature.
Yes, correct. So when we point and we say, oh my gosh, this is the hand of God, right? There might be a child there saying, what do you mean? It's just water. No, you don't understand. Water doesn't do that. It must be somebody is making the water do that. It's a miracle, right? Okay. So now, Havaya represents God's transcendence. It's the name of God. It's the name of God. It's an expression. The Torah, is it an expression of God? Yeah, you bet it's an expression. It has all these different rules and nuances. It has defined properties. Is it God himself? No, God transcends that. So now, Havaya is the name of God, which is God's expression to us. On Kippur, how is it that we're able to reach forgiveness? So the Alter Rebbe says, we're able to transcend God's expression. Transcend God's expression of rules. So now, let's say, there are certain scientists, they looked at, for actually hundreds of years, they looked at the splitting of the sea and they tried to explain it naturally, right? They're trying to explain it naturally. So what are they saying? They're saying, oh, it's not really God, right? It's not really God. It's really nature, right? So now, what's the idea of a miracle? The idea of a miracle is it's not nature, right? It's not nature. Nature is broken. So, Havaya is the way God expresses himself in a transcendent way. If God would truly express himself beyond a transcendent way, but beyond expression, we wouldn't be able to see it. In fact, it's here right now.
Understood.
Yeah. Okay, so now let's work back. So now Yom Kippur, why does Yom Kippur get forgiveness? So this is what we spoke about. Why did the golden calf get forgiveness, golden calf? God has rules, and we broke the rules, and God said, my connection with the Jewish people is actually deeper than the rules. I like the rules. In fact, I created them. In fact, they're purposely created by me. I like the rules, but our relationship is deeper than the rules. Yeah.
Right. If God creates the world, he can uncreate the world.
Yeah, that's right.
But
So now that's what Lifnei Havaya is.
But God is the supreme being.
Correct.
There is no other. There's nothing in the universe higher than God.
Yeah.
So how can there be something? And Havaya is an expression.
Havaya is a name of God. It's a name. It's an expression. So God is on Yom Kippur. We have this bond with higher than God's expressions. It's more
So
intimate.
Havaya is an imperfect representation of God, and the higher,
Havaya is what we're trying to say is Havaya is an expression. It's an expression. It's a name. So like, let's say your child doesn't know your name. Is he still your child? Right? Is he still your child? Let's say he does know your name. Let's say he does know what you look like. Well, so his relationship will be better than if he doesn't know you. But he's still your child, even if he doesn't know you.
okay,
So what we're saying here is Havaya is a name of God, and it's a perfect name, but it's an expression. And our relationship on which expression has rules to it. It
So-
has the definitive property to it.
right, but because it's an expression, it must mean there are aspects of God beyond the name,
Correct.
and that's what we're talking
That's what we're talking about.
about. Okay.
So that's what happens on Yom Kippur. V'gam b'negei Purim yedua da'atam shel nizkar shem Havaya b'chol Megillas Esther. The reason why God's name is not in the Megillah, right? So why is God's name not in the Megillah? The Jewish people weren't grateful to God. They weren't thankful to God. Esther and Mordechai wrote the Megillah. God's name's not in the Megillah. Why is that? Lefisha b'Purim hu gilui or in Seif shel Ma'alim Havaya. Because on Purim there was a revelation of God, which was higher than expression. So it wasn't a lack of God mentioning God in the Megillah. Purim was an expression of God higher than expression. It was the revelation of Purim was deeper than a name. So therefore they said, if we put a name in the Megillah, we'll be belittling what God did to us, what God did. That's what Esther and Mordechai did. I'm going to stop here, but that's another relationship between Purim. So relationship number one is that they both have raffles. And relationship number two, they both have this idea of godly relationship beyond name, beyond expression of God.
Okay. So but God's name is in the Torah.
God's name is in the Torah.
So does that put?
So the Torah is quite clearly an expression of God. It's an expression, right? The Torah is very defined, extremely defined. Right? And that's why Moses says, erase me from the Torah, right? That we learned on Friday.
So is Megillat Esther on a higher level than the Torah?